you may know, April is National Poetry Month, and what better way to commemorate the month than with a visit from our old friend, Ilan Stavans. But first, before we turn it over to Ilan, let me remind you how the first Wednesday lectures come to be in Brattleboro. And that's through our wonderful partner organization in Montpelier called the Vermont Humanities Council, which is our sponsor for this great lifelong learning series. In addition to Brattleboro, the series is now in nine libraries across the state, with lectures beginning in October and continuing through May. And I should mention the May lecture, which will be Wednesday, May 2nd, One Nation Under Contract, which is a talk on the privatization of American foreign policy and its consequences by Professor Allison Stanger from Middlebury College. So that should be a real interesting one, and that one is sponsored by the Wyndham World Affairs Council of Vermont. The Vermont Humanities Council cannot do it alone, so that's why we need local and other sponsors and funders to make these late 8 lectures happen. This year, I'd like to thank the Brattleboro Savings and Loan, Downs Racklin Martin, and the Wyndham World Affairs Council of Vermont. And of course, our major funder for this series is the Friends of Brooks Memorial Library. And I must also mention the Vermont Department of Libraries, which is the statewide sponsor. So the Friends do this in many ways, and it's through fundraising. And one of the major ways is there are 3 book sales a year, and we have the paperback book sale coming up the Friday, April 13th, and Saturday, April 14th. So hope you might stop by and check out what we'll be selling that day. And I also like to mention their other fundraising event, which is the annual Say What Do You Know trivia quiz, which will take place on Sunday, April 22nd at 2 p.m. And you're invited to form a team of no more than 6 people. It's $100 to enter per team, or $25 a person if it's less than 6. And there will be 5 categories of questions, 5 questions per category. We have some different categories this year. One is called Name That Tune. We'll play about 6 seconds of a song, and you have to guess what it is. And the other one is Art in the Library, which is kind of an open book quiz. All you have to do is walk around the library and see all the art on the walls and note what they are, and that'll be one of the categories of questions. So if you're interested in joining us on Sunday, April 22nd, see me or Bob Oser, the Friends president, afterwards, and we'll get you signed up. Tonight, I'm again delighted to introduce our friend from the South, and not Latin America, but Amherst, Massachusetts, Ilan Stavans. Ilan has been our first Wednesday guest twice before. In the spring of 2008, you may have heard him speak about Don Quixote on its 400th anniversary of that novel. And on fall 2009, he spoke on immigration, which is from one of his books. He is an internationally known, award-winning cultural critic, linguist, translator, public speaker, editor, short story writer, and TV host, whose best-selling work focused on language, identity, politics, and history. Born in Mexico in 1961 into a Jewish family with roots in Eastern Europe, he was raised in a multilingual environment. Professor Stavans is the recipient of numerous awards, fellowships, and other honors, including an Emmy nomination, a Guggenheim Fellowship, National Jewish Book Award, the Latino Hall of Fame Award, Chile's Presidential Medal, and several grants. He is the Louis Sebring Professor in Latin American Latino Culture at Amherst College. His many books include Spanglish, The Making of a New American Language, and is the editor of the FSG 20th Century Latin American Poetry, which is for sale tonight, compliments of everyone's books, and a new memoir which just came out in February called Return to Centro Histórico, A Mexican Jew Looks for His Roots. Please welcome Ilan Stavans.
Thank you very much for the introduction. I'm thrilled to be here today. I'm thrilled to be here because it is Vermont, because it is Wednesday, and because we congregate in a public library. What a celebration. I have been promoting this idea that you guys have in Vermont all over the country. Everybody should go to a public library on a first Wednesday and think and read and reflect and you started it first. And I'm thrilled and delighted to be here as well, because I am always surprised that people still want to hear poetry, and that they are interested in words, that they can make configurations, that propose different meanings, and even more when the poetry is in translation. Translation, as Robert Frost said, is what gets lost. Poetry is what gets lost in translation. But I think that poetry is what really comes forth in translation. A good translator of poetry is one that will not play with the exact same words, but will reinvent the poem in the language, in the target language, and thus make that poem and that poet feel at home in that new landscape, that new linguistic and geographical landscape. I can't believe that I am invited again to read poetry, which is the favorite thing that I do for me, and that you're going to be patient and hear the different poems and poets that I have for you. Latin American poetry is very heterogeneous, complex, the way any poetry from any region should be. There are poets that are well known that connect poetry with politics, and this is as it should in a continent where there is a great disparity between the haves and the have-nots, and between those that have access to power and those that are left out of power. Poets often in Latin America take upon themselves the task of giving voice to those that don't have voice, and thus the words that you're going to be hearing today come from a poet, but behind that poet, or together with that poet, there are huge masses of people that are represented in the poem or that are not, but come to us thanks to the art that that poet has engaged in. But there are many poets in Latin America who do not connect poetry with politics, and it would be a simplification for me and for anybody else to say that all poetry from the region is ideological in tune and in tone. Just as there are many different types of registers in the United States, from Emily Dickinson and Richard Wilbur to writers that use their background to confront and make us face the situation that we live in. There are many poets in Latin America, as you will hear, that look for other ways of inspiration, and they are equally powerful. And I might even say that they are equally political, that there is no hiding who we are and where we come from, even when we hide who we are and where we come from. I have a number of different poets for you. They come from the anthology that I put together last year, the FSG book of 20th century Latin American poetry. All of these poets are from the 20th century, understood not artificially as from the moment the year 1900 came to be to the moment the year 2000 ceased to be, but poets that belong in their aesthetic and emotional and spiritual way to that 20th century, and in many ways the 20th century lives on in other poets, as you will see toward the end. My way of doing it will be first to read the poem in Spanish, and then to read the poem in English. I will always say who the translator of the poem is. The translator is as creative and important as the writer. After all, we're getting that poem filtered through the sensibility of that translator. I will also tell you one or two words, not very many, just to place it in context, what the poem is in the landscape of the poet himself or herself. For those of you who don't know Spanish, you should. Certainly, in the 21st century in the United States, there's no excuse. Spanish is an essential language in this country and in the world at large. But if you don't know Spanish, I hope you will appreciate the sounds and rhythms and music of the Spanish language as much as you will of the English. One doesn't need to know the meaning of words in order to appreciate the words themselves. The first poem is called Dos Patrias. It is by a Cuban poet, José Martí, who was born in Cuba and was a journalist who traveled all over Latin America and came to the United States. At one point met Walt Whitman in New York and plotted, together with a number of other intellectuals and guerrilla fighters, the downfall of the Spanish regime in Cuba at the end of the 19th century. And in 1895, Martí went back to Cuba in order to make this dream come true, and he died a couple of days later after descending the boat on the battlefield. He wrote children's stories. He wrote many magnificent chronicles about American life that are very much in tone with Walt Whitman. And he also wrote some of the best poetry of the Spanish language. Dos patrias. Dos patrias tengo yo, Cuba y la noche. ¿O son una las dos? ¿No bien retira su majestad el sol, con largos velos y un clavel en la mano? Silenciosa, Cuba, cual viuda triste me aparece. Yo sé cuál es ese clavel sangriento que en la mano le tiembla. Está vacío mi pecho, destrozado está y vacío en donde estaba el corazón. Ya es hora de empezar a morir. La noche es buena para decir adiós. La luz estorba y la palabra humana. El universo habla mejor que el hombre. Cual bandera que invita a batallar, la llama roja de la vela flamea. Las ventanas abro, ya estrecho en mí, muda, rompiendo las hojas del clavel como una nube que enturbia el cielo. Cuba, viuda, pasa. Two homelands, this is my translation. I have two homelands, Cuba and the night. Or are they one and the same? No sooner does His Majesty the Sun retire than Cuba, with long veils and a carnation in hand, silent, like a sad widow, appears before me. I know that bleeding carnation trembling in her hand. It's empty. My chest is destroyed and empty where the heart once was. It's time to begin dying. The night is right to say goodbye. The light is bothersome, and the word is human. The universe speaks better than man. Like a flag inviting us to battle, the candle's red flame flickers. I open the windows, overwhelmed inside. Mute, blocking the carnation's leaves, like a cloud darkening the sky. Cuba, a widow, passes by. Rubén Darío was born in Nicaragua in 1867, and he died also in Nicaragua in 1916. He is to us what maybe Walt Whitman is to you, the writer of multitudes and the writer of possibilities, the poet who almost with a single stroke invented Latin America. He is the most important Latin American poet of the end of the 19th century and the first half of the 20th century. And he is known as the father of Modernismo, the modernist movement that we had over there. He was a very politically active man, a friend of José Martí. And in this poem that you're going to hear, translated by Lysander Kempt, he talks directly to Roosevelt. It is a poem written at the end of the 19th century, first in Spanish. A Roosevelt. Es con voz de la Biblia o verso de Walt Whitman
que habría de llegar hasta ti, cazador, primitivo y moderno, sencillo y complicado, con un algo de Washington y 4 de Nimrod. Eres los Estados Unidos, eres el futuro invasor de la América ingenua que tiene sangre indígena, que aún reza a Jesucristo y que habla en español. Eres soberbio y fuerte ejemplar de tu raza. Eres culto, eres hábil, te opones a Tolstoy. Y domando caballos o asesinando tigres, eres un Alejandro Nabucodonosor. Eres un profesor de energía, como dicen los locos de hoy. ¿Crees que la vida es incendio, que el progreso es erupción, que en donde pones la bala, el porvenir pones? No. Los Estados Unidos son potentes y grandes. Cuando ellos se estremecen, hay un hondo temblor que pasa por las vértebras enormes de los Andes. Si clamáis, se oye como el rugir del león. Ya Hugo a Grant le dijo, las estrellas son vuestras. Apenas brilla alzándose el argentino sol y la estrella chilena se levanta. Sois ricos, juntáis al culto de Hércules el culto de Mamón. Y alumbrando el camino de la fácil conquista a libertad, levanta su antorcha en Nueva York. Mas la América nuestra, que tenía poetas desde los viejos tiempos de Netzahualcóyotl, que ha guardado las huellas de los pies del gran Baco, que el alfabeto pánico en su tiempo aprendió, que consultó los astros, que conoció la Atlántida, cuyo nombre nos llega resonando de Platón, que desde los remotos momentos de su vida vive de luz, de fuego, de perfume, de amor, la América fragante de Cristóbal Colón, la América católica, la América española, la América en que dijo el noble Cuauhtémoc, yo no estoy en un lecho de rosas, esa América que tiembla de huracanes y que vive de amor, hombres de ojos sajones y alma bárbara, vive y sueña y ama y vibra y es la hija del sol. Tened cuidado, vive la América española. Hay 1000 cachorros sueltos del león español. Se necesitaría, Roosevelt, ser, por Dios mismo, el riflero terrible y el fuerte cazador para poder tenernos en vuestras férreas garras. Y pues contáis con todo, falta una cosa: Dios. To Roosevelt. The voice that would reach you, Hunter, must speak with biblical tones or in the poetry of Walt Whitman. You are primitive and modern, simple and complex. You are one part George Washington and one part Nimrod. You are the United States, future invader of our naive America with its Indian blood, an America that still prays to Christ and still speaks Spanish. You are strong, proud model of your race. You are cultured and able. You oppose Tolstoy. You are an Alexander, a Nebuchadnezzar, breaking horses and murdering tigers. You are a professor of energy, as the current lunatics say. You think that life is a fire, that progress is an eruption, that the future is wherever your bullet strikes. No. The United States is grand and powerful. Whenever it trembles, a profound shudder runs down the enormous backbone of the Andes. If it shouts, the sound is like the roar of a lion. And Hugo said to Grant, the stars are yours. The dawning Argentine sun barely shines. The star of Chile is rising. A wealthy country joining the cult of Mammon and to the cult of Hercules, while liberty, lighting the path to easy conquest, rises its torch in New York. But our own America, which has had poets since the ancient times of Netzahualcóyotl, which preserves the footprints of the great Bacchus and learned the panic alphabet once and consulted the stars, which also knew Atlantis, whose name came ringing down to us in Plato and has lived since the earlier moments in life, in light, in fire, in fragrance, and in love, the America of Moctezuma and Atahualpa, the aromatic America of Columbus, Catholic America, Spanish America, the America where Noble Cuauhtemoc said, "I am not in a bed of roses," our America, trembling with hurricanes, trembling with love, oh men with Saxon eyes and barbarous souls, our America lives and dreams and loves and pulsates, and it is the daughter of the sun. Be careful. Be careful. Long live Spanish America. 1,000 cubs of the Spanish lion are roaming free. Roosevelt, you must become, by God's own will, the deadly rifleman and the dreadful hunter before you can catch us in your iron claws. And though you have everything, you're lacking one thing: God.
What's his name?
His name is Rubén Darío. Rubén and Darío, D-A-R-I with an accent O. And if you ask me what is the most important word in Latin American poetry, I will say that no, that comes right at the middle of this poem. The no that says, we will not stand this attitude. We are unique, we are different, we are proud, and we will manage to survive. A friend of Martí and of Rubén Darío, Argentine Leopoldo Lugones, was a socialist when he was young and a very conservative in his old age. As many Latin American poets of the 20th century, he died of suicide, depression. And this poem, called A Story of My Death, which I translated, is, to my mind, one of the most beautiful he left behind. In Spanish, it is called Historia de mi muerte. Soñé la muerte y era muy sencillo. Una hebra de seda me envolvía y a cada beso tuyo, con una vuelta menos, me ceñía. Y cada beso tuyo era un día, y el tiempo que mediaba entre dos besos, una noche. La muerte es muy sencilla. Y poco a poco fue desenvolviéndose la hebra fatal. Ya no la retenía sino por solo un cabo entre los dedos, cuando de pronto te pusiste fría y ya no me besaste y solté el cabo y se me fue la vida. Story of my death. I dreamed of death, and it was quite simple. A silk thread enwrapped me, and each kiss of yours with a turn unraveled me. And each of your kisses was a day, and the time between two kisses, a night. Death is quite simple. And little by little, the fatal thread unwrapped itself. I no longer control it, but for a single bit between my fingers. Then, suddenly, you became cold and no longer kissed me. I let the thread go, and my life vanished. Gabriela Mistral is one of the two most important Chilean poets of all time. The other one is coming shortly after her. She was the first Latin American to win the Nobel Prize. If I am not wrong, she was also the first woman, but I might not be right. She's certainly the only Latin American woman in literature who has ever won the award. She saw herself not only as a poet, but as a teacher and as a mother, in spite of the fact that she never married and left no children. She adopted a child. For those reasons, She is known in Latin America as our mother, nuestra madre. This is a poem that she wrote in the middle of her life. She was born in 1889 and died in 1957. And it is translated by Ursula Le Guin, who is a very prominent science fiction writer and a writer of wonderful essays and novels. La ola del sueño, aquieta regules. La marea del sueño comienza a llegar desde el santo palo y el último mar. Derechamente viene a silbo y señal, subiendo el mundo viene en blanco animal. Ha pasado Taitao, niebla y chañaral, a tu puerta y tu cuna llega a acabar. Sube del viejo polo, eterna y mortal, viene al mar Antártico y vuelve a bajar. La ola encopetada se quiebra en el umbral, nos busca, nos halla y cae sin hablar. En cuanto ya te cubra, dejas de ronronear y en llegándome al pecho, yo dejo de cantar. Donde la casa estuvo, está ella no más. Donde tú mismo estabas, ahora ya no estás. Está la hora del sueño, espumajeo y sal, y la tierra inocente, sin bien y sin mal. La marea del sueño comienza a llegar desde el santo polo y el último mar. The sleep wave, Duqueta regules. It's rising now, the tide of sleep, from the sacred south and the final sea. It comes straight to whistle and call, climbing the world, a white animal. It's past Taitao, niebla en chañaral, at your door, your cradle. It's going to fall. It rises from the ancient pole, mortal and eternal, from the Antarctic sea. It comes and sinks again. The lofty wave breaks on our door. It seeks us, finds us, and silently falls. As it covers you, you cease murmuring. When it's up to my breast, I cease to sing. Where the house was, it is no more. Where you were, nobody's there. There's only the sleep wave's salt foaming flood and the innocent earth without evil or good. It's rising now, the tide of sleep from the sacred south and the final sea. Before I continue, let me tell you, let me give you two images that might be of help to you. Translation is one of the most difficult tasks when it comes to poetry. There is a chapter in Don Quixote, in the second part, where Don Quixote and Sancho enter a bookstore in Barcelona, and they are talking among themselves about translation. And at one point, Don Quixote tells Sancho that to read a book in translation is like looking at a Flemish carpet from the back. You know there are colors, there are silhouettes, but you can only guess them. You can only have an approximation to them. And there's another also beautiful image about translation by an early Hebrew poet that became eventually an Israeli with the creation of the State of Israel in 1948, Bialik, Chaim Nachman Bialik, who said once that to read a poem in translation is like kissing a bride through a veil. This is one of my favorite poets. He's not well known in English, and it saddens me. His light, his power, his faith, and his conviction. He was a friend of Pablo Neruda. He was older than Neruda. Neruda eclipsed him because Neruda was big, and because Neruda was very prolific, and because Neruda knew how to sell himself too, and Vallejo did not. In one of the early poems by César Vallejo, he wrote that he would die in Paris on a rainy afternoon. And he died in Paris on a rainy afternoon. I'm going to read two poems by him, and I'm also going to read 2 poems by Neruda, who comes immediately after. Not immediately after, there's one in between. One of the defining moments in Latin American poetry is the Spanish Civil War of 1936 to 1938. It not only defined Hemingway and Dos Passos and a number of American writers, but it defined also many of ours. And 2 of them were Neruda and Vallejo. And these 2 poems are about Spain and about the Civil War. The first one is called Masa. The translation is by Puerto Rican poet Martín Espada. Masa. Al fin de la batalla y muerto el combatiente, vino hacia él un hombre y le dijo, no mueras, te amo tanto. Pero el cadáver, ay, siguió muriendo. Se le acercaron 2 y repitiéronle, no nos dejes, valor, vuelve a la vida. Pero el cadáver, ay, siguió muriendo. Acudieron a él 20, 100, 1000, 500,000, clamando, tanto amor y no poder nada contra la muerte. Pero el cadáver, ay, siguió muriendo. Lo rodearon millones de individuos con un ruego común, quédate, hermano. Pero el cadáver, ay, siguió muriendo. Entonces, todos los hombres de la tierra lo rodearon. Les vio el cadáver triste, emocionado, incorporóse lentamente, abrazó al primer hombre, echóse a andar. Mass. After the battle, when the fighter was dead, a man came toward him and said, don't die. I love you so much. But oh, the dead man just kept dying. 2 more approached him, repeating, don't leave us. Have courage. Come back to life. But oh, the dead man just kept dying. 20, 100, 1,000, 500,000 came clamoring. So much love, powerless against death. But oh, the dead man just kept dying. Millions surrounded him with a common plea, stay, brother, stay. But oh, the dead man just kept dying. Then all the people of the earth surrounded him. The dead man looked at them, sad, overwhelmed, sat up slowly, embraced the first man, and began to walk. Cuídate, España, de tu propia España. Cuídate, España, de tu propia España. Cuídate de la hoz sin el martillo, cuídate del martillo sin la hoz. Cuídate de la víctima a pesar suyo, del verdugo a pesar suyo y del indiferente a pesar suyo. Cuídate del que antes de que cante el gallo negárate 3 veces y del que te negó después 3 veces. Cuídate de las calaveras sin las tibias y de las tibias sin las calaveras. Cuídate de los nuevos poderosos. Cuídate del que come tus cadáveres y del que devora muertos a tus vivos. Cuídate del leal 100% y cuídate del cielo más acá del aire, así como cuídate del aire más acá del cielo. Cuídate de los que te aman, cuídate de tus héroes, cuídate de tus muertos, cuídate de la república, cuídate del futuro. Translated by Margaret Sayers Peden, be wary, Spain, of your own Spain. Be wary, Spain, of your own Spain. Be wary of the sickle without the hammer. Be wary of the hammer without the sickle. Be wary of the victim who did not choose to be, of the executioner who did not choose to be, and of the indifferent who did not choose to be. Be wary of he who before the cock crows may deny you 3 times, and of he who later did deny you 3 times. Be wary of skulls without tibias, and of tibias without skulls. Be wary of the newly powerful. Be wary of he who eats your corpses, of he who devours dead your living. Be wary of the 100% loyal. Be wary of the sky beyond the air, and be wary of the air beyond the sky. Be wary of those who love you. Be wary of your heroes. Be wary of your dead. Be wary of the republic. Be wary of the future. Borges. We always have to come to Borges. I don't know, I could tell you so many things about Borges. Borges, an Argentine, the Argentine, was born in 1899, died in 1986. He, like Homer and Milton, was blind and also was a voracious and an avid reader. You can see the contradiction. He wrote poetry from memory because he was blind, and he was a map to the many poets and poems that preceded him, particularly those in the United States. He adored Whitman and Dickens and came to Amherst to go see her house and went to Whitman's tomb to pay tribute. And if asked, he often said that what really terrorized him the most were mirrors. He was afraid to see himself reflected in a mirror and see that there was another Borges. And he said that mirrors multiply needlessly the number of people in the world, and that if he could, he would abolish them. He was always interested in alter egos and in the Hyde of Dr. Jekyll, or in the Jekyll of Dr. Hyde, of Mr. Hyde. And one of his best pieces is called Borges y Yo. In English, it's called Borges and I. I'm going to read it first in Spanish. It's my translation. It is not really a poem, but Borges included it in a book of poems. So why not read it as a poem? Borges y Yo. Al otro, a Borges, es a quien le ocurren las cosas. Yo camino por Buenos Aires y me demoro, acaso ya mecánicamente, para mirar el arco de un zaguán y la puerta cancel. De Borges tengo noticias por el correo y veo su nombre en una terna de profesores o en un diccionario biográfico. Me gustan los relojes de arena, los mapas, la tipografía del siglo XVIII, las etimologías, el sabor del café y la prosa de Stevenson. El otro comparte esas preferencias, pero de un modo vanidoso que las convierte en atributos de un actor. Sería exagerado afirmar que nuestra relación es hostil. Yo vivo, yo me dejo vivir, para que Borges pueda tramar su literatura. Y esa literatura me justifica. Nada me cuesta confesar que ha logrado ciertas páginas válidas, pero esas páginas no me pueden salvar. Quizá porque lo bueno ya no es de nadie, ni siquiera del otro, sino de la tradición y del lenguaje. Por lo demás, yo estoy destinado a perderme, definitivamente, y solo algún instante de mí podrá sobrevivir en el otro. Poco a poco voy cediéndole todo, aunque me consta su perversa costumbre de falsear y magnificar. Spinoza entendió que todas las cosas quieren perseverar en su ser. La piedra eternamente quiere ser piedra y el tigre un tigre. Yo he de quedar en Borges, no en mí, si es que alguien soy, pero me reconozco menos en sus libros que en muchos otros o que en el laborioso rasgueo de una guitarra. Hace años yo traté de liberarme de él y pasé de las mitologías del arrabal a los juegos con el tiempo y con el infinito, pero esos juegos son de Borges ahora, y tendré que idear otras cosas. Así mi vida es una fuga, y todo lo pierdo, y todo es del olvido o del otro. No sé cuál de los dos escribe esta página. Borges and I. The other one, Borges, is to whom things happen. I walk through Buenos Aires, stop maybe a bit mechanically to look at the arch of an entryway and a grillwork door. I have news of Borges by mail or when I see his name in a list of professors or in a biographical dictionary. I like hourglasses, maps, 18th century typography, the taste of coffee, and Stevenson's prose. The other shares those preferences, but with a vanity that turns them into an actor's attributes. It would be an exaggeration to affirm that our relationship is hostile. I live, I let myself live, so that Borges can plot his literature, and that literature justifies me. It doesn't cost me anything to confess that he has achieved a few valid pages, but those pages can't save me, perhaps because what's good no longer belongs to anyone, not even to the other, but to language and tradition. In any case, I'm destined to be lost definitively, and just some instant of me will survive in the other. Little by little, I cede everything, even though I am aware of his perverse tendency to falsify and pontificate. Spinoza understood that all things want to be preserved in their being. The stone eternally wants to be a stone, and the tiger a tiger. I shall remain in Borges, not in myself, if I am someone, but I recognize myself less in his books than in many others, or in the laborious strumming of a guitar. Years ago, I tried freeing myself from him and went from the mythologies of the suburbs to the games with time and the infinite, but those games are Borges's now, and I shall come up with other things. Thus, my life is a flight, and I lose everything, and everything belongs to oblivion or to the other. I don't know which of the two writes this page. I love those two lines, everything belongs to oblivion. And I love that line that says, what's good doesn't really belong to anyone, but to language and tradition. And maybe this is a good moment to give you a quote from a very newly celebrated Latin American writer who was also a poet, Roberto Bolaño, who is the author of The Savage Detectives and so many wonderful books, 2,666. And Roberto Bolaño, in The Savage Detectives, says, true poets don't belong to any country. For them, the only borders that ought to be respected are the borders of dreams, the trembling borders of love and lovelessness, the borders of courage and fear, the golden borders of morality. It's a little ridiculous then, if poets don't belong to any country, to be telling you about Latin American poets. But that was Bolaño, and this is me. Neruda. Borges hated Neruda. He said that he was a professional Chilean, or Chilean. And Neruda despised Borges, thinking that he was not really an Argentine. Neruda left us with 3,254 poems. It's a lot of poems. A lot of bad poems. I mean, inevitably, if you write so many poems, some of them are likely to be bad. But some incredible poems as well. Some marvelous poems. And I'm going to read now my favorite poem in the Spanish language. I hope I do justice to it. Every time I read it, I find something else in it, and then I kind of get detoured or distracted. It is a poem to end or to begin all poems. It is a poem of humility and conviction. Anyway, why shall I tell you what it is about? You will hear it. It's called Explico algunas cosas. I explain a few things. And it is translated by your very own Galway Kinnell in a wonderful translation. Wonderful translation. Let me just precede it by telling you that, like Vallejo, Neruda had gone to Spain, and we Latin Americans, I think deservedly, have a very ambivalent relationship with Spain, because it's the mother country, and because it's the mother country. And they both had gone to Spain to help the mother country in spite of the conflicted feelings that they had. And Neruda, who was a very, as I mentioned, charming man and very friendly, ended up having a house in Madrid where most Spanish poets of that generation came to visit and to talk and to eat and to drink wine and to write poetry. It must have been a wonderful house, including Machado and Lorca before he was killed, martyred by the Franco regime, by the Franco forces. So it is a poem about that house. And it is a poem also about a transition in the life of Neruda. His early poetry is about his homeland, Chile. And he writes about the flora and fauna of Chile. He writes about volcanoes. He wants through poetry to study everything. He was an incredibly curious poet, to study everything that is Chile, to create an encyclopedia of Chile through poetry. And that is what his book Canto General is all about. Everything Chilean is there. That was his mission. And then he went to Spain. And before he went to Spain, he was mostly an apolitical or a reluctantly political poet. And when he arrived to Spain and had this house, he had this transformation. Explico algunas cosas. Preguntaréis, ¿y dónde están las lilas y la metafísica cubierta de amapolas? Y la lluvia que a menudo golpeaba sus palabras llenándolas de agujeros y pájaros. Os voy a contar todo lo que me pasa. Yo vivía en un barrio de Madrid, con campanas, con relojes, con árboles. Desde ahí se veía el rostro seco de Castilla como un océano de cuero. Mi casa era llamada la Casa de las Flores, porque por todas partes estallaban geranios. Era una bella casa, con perros y chiquillos. Raúl, ¿te acuerdas? ¿Te acuerdas, Rafael? Federico, ¿te acuerdas debajo de la tierra? ¿Te acuerdas de mi casa con balcones en donde la luz de junio se ahogaba y ahogaba flores en tu boca? Hermano, todo era grandes voces, sal de mercaderías, aglomeraciones de pan palpitante, mercados de mi barrio de Argüelles con una estatua como un tintero pálido entre las merluzas. El aceite llegaba a las cucharas. Un profundo latido de pies y manos llenaba las calles, metros, litros, esencia aguda de la vida, pescados hacinados con textura de techos con el sol frío en el cual la flecha se fatigaba. Delirante marfil fino de las patatas, tomates repetidos hasta el mar. Y una mañana estaba todo ardiendo. Y una mañana las hogueras salían de la tierra devorando seres y desde entonces fuego, pólvora desde entonces y desde entonces sangre. Bandidos con aviones y con moros, bandidos con sortijas y duquesas, bandidos con frailes negros, bendiciendo, venían por el cielo a matar niños. Y por las calles, la sangre de los niños corría simplemente como sangre de niños. Chacales que chacal rechazaría, piedras que el cerdo secos mordería escupiendo, víboras que las víboras odiarían. Frente a vosotros he visto la sangre de España levantarse para ahogaros en una sola ola de orgullo y de cuchillos. Generales traidores, mirad mi casa muerta, mirad España rota, pero de cada casa muerta sale metal ardiendo en vez de flores, pero de cada hueco de España sale España, pero de cada niño muerto sale un fusil con ojos, y pero de cada crimen nacen balas que os hallarán un día el sitio en el corazón. Preguntaréis, ¿por qué su poesía no nos habla del sueño, de las hojas, de los grandes volcanes de su país natal? Venid a ver la sangre por las calles. Venid a ver la sangre por las calles. Venid a ver la sangre por las calles. I explain a few things. You will ask, but where are the lilacs and the metaphysics covered with poppies, and the rain that often struck his words, filling them with holes and birds? Let me tell you what's happening with me. I lived in a barrio of Madrid with bells, with clocks, with trees. From there, you could see the parched face of Castile like an ocean of leather. My house was called the House of Flowers because from everywhere geraniums burst. It was a beautiful house with dogs, with children. Raúl, do you remember? Do you remember, Rafael, Federico, do you remember Under the Ground? Do you remember my house with balconies where the June light drowned the flowers in your mouth? Brother? Everything was loud voices, salt of goods, crowds of pulsating bread, marketplaces in my barrio of Argüelles with its statue like a pale inkwell set down among the hake. Oil flowed into spoons. A deep throbbing of feet and hands filled the streets. Meters, litters, the hard edges of life, heaps of fish, geometry of roofs under a cold sun in which the weather vane grew tired. Delirious fine ivory of potatoes, tomatoes, more tomatoes, all the way to the sea. In one morning, it was all burning. In one morning, bonfires sprang out of the earth, devouring humans. And from then on, gunpowder. From then on, gunpowder that came as blood. Bandidos with planes and moors, bandidos with rings and duchesses, bandidos with black friars signing the cross coming down from the sky to kill children. And in the streets, the blood of children ran simply like blood of children. Jackals, the jackals would despise. Stones the dry thistle would bite on and spit out. Vipers, the vipers would abominate. Facing you, I have seen the blood of Spain rise up to drown you in a single wave of pride and knives. Traitors, generals, look at my dead house. Look at Spain, broken. From every house, burning metal comes out. Instead of flowers, from every crater of Spain comes Spain, and from every dead child comes a rifle with eyes. From every crime, bullets are born that one day will find out in you the sight of the heart. You will ask, why doesn't his poetry speak to us of dreams, of leaves, of the great volcanoes of his native land. Come and see the blood on the streets. Come and see the blood in the streets. Come and see the blood in the streets. Then I'll read a strange poem that I like very much, and then I'll go back to Neruda to read the poem that I read to my wife once a year. Octavio Paz is Mexican, as I am. He is Mexican. I am kind of Mexican, remote from Amherst. Was born in 1914, died in 1998. Like Mistral and like Neruda, he won the Nobel Prize. And this is a beautiful, very long poem that I'm not going to read to you complete because we want to go home. But I'm going to read you only the first part. It's called Nocturno en San Ildefonso. It is a poem about the city of Mexico, in particular downtown Mexico. Now, if Diego Rivera wants to use color and silhouettes and images in order to recreate the history of Mexico, Paz uses words to recreate. Paz wasn't Diego Rivera's contemporary. He was the next generation. Wants to use words in order to recreate the noises and sounds and the dreams, the fantasy life of the Mexicans that live in Mexico City, including himself included. It's a long poem, as I said, and this is only the first part. It is translated by Elliot Weinberger. Nocturno en San Ildefonso. It is a very surrealist poem. Let's see. The surrealists, among many things, wanted to replicate through language the cadence of dreams. Nocturno en San Ildefonso. Inventa la noche en mi ventana otra noche, otro espacio. Fiesta convulsa en un metro cuadrado de negrura. Momentáneas confederaciones de fuego, nómadas geometrías, números errantes. Del amarillo al verde al rojo se desovilla la espiral. Ventana, lámina imantada de llamadas y respuestas, caligrafía de alto voltaje, mentido cielo infierno de la industria sobre la piel cambiante del instante, signos, semillas, la noche los dispara, suben, estallan allá arriba, se palpitan, ya quemados en un cono de sombra, reaparecen lumbres divagantes, racimos de sílabas, incendios giratorios se dispersan, otra vez, añicos. La ciudad los inventa y los anula. Estoy a la entrada de un túnel. Estas frases perforan el tiempo. Tal vez yo soy ese que espera al final del túnel. Hablo con los ojos cerrados. Alguien ha plantado en mis párpados un bosque de agujas magnéticas. Alguien guía la hilera de estas palabras. La página se ha vuelto un hormiguero. El vacío se estableció en la boca de mi estómago. Caigo interminablemente sobre este vacío. Caigo sin caer. Tengo las manos frías, los pies fríos, pero los alfabetos arden. El espacio se hace y se deshace. La noche insiste, la noche palpa mi frente, palpa mis pensamientos. ¿Qué quiere? In my window, night invents another night, another space. Carnival convulsed in a square yard of blackness, momentary confederations of fire, nomadic geometries, errant numbers, from yellow to green to red, the spiraled on window, magnetic plate of calls and answers, high voltage calligraphy, folds heaven, hell of industry on the changing skin of the moment, signs, seeds. The night shoots them all off. They rise, bursting above, folds still burning, in a cone of shadow reappear, rambling sparks, syllable clusters, spinning flame that scatters smithereens. Once more, the city invents and erases them. I am at the entrance to a tunnel. These phrases drill through time. Perhaps I am that which waits at the end of a tunnel. I speak with eyes closed. Someone has planted a forest of magnetic needles in my eyelids. Someone guides the thread of these words. The page has become an ant's nest. The void has settled at the pit of my stomach. I fall endlessly. I fall through that void. I fall without falling. My hands are cold. My feet cold. But the alphabets are burning. Space makes and unmakes itself. The night insists. The night touches my forehead, touches my thoughts. What does it want? All right. I'm going to read now a Puerto Rican poet. And then I'm going to read a Neruda poem, and we'll finish with that. Puerto Ricans live in or on a hyphen. They are and aren't Latin Americans. They are and aren't North Americans. They are, in that sense, very much of the 21st century. And as such, they go back and forth between an island and a mainland, and between one language and another, between Spanish and English. They live in between. Probably if they own anything, they own Spanglish, which is a manifestation of that duality. And Janina Bracci, born in New York, in Puerto Rico in 1953, wrote this beautiful poem about being in both places. And I can't translate it. It's not translated because it's written in the two languages. A perfect example of the dilemma in which she lives. It's called Pelos en la Lengua. And if you don't understand some of it, that's the point. El bilingüismo es una estética bound to double business. Oh, this most sweet, when in one line two crafts directly meet. To be and not to be. Habla con la boca llena and from both sides of its mouth. Está con Dios y con el diablo. Con el punto y con la coma. Es un purgatorio, un signo grammatical intermedio entre heaven and earth, un semicolon entre la independencia y la estatidad, un estado libre asociado, un mamarrancho multicultural. No tiene cláusulas ni subterfugios, no anda con gringolas ni con muletas, no es artrítoco, no se queja, aúlla como un perro al infinito y pide maná del cielo que caiga como lluvia. No se ahoga en un vaso de agua, no deja que le doren la píldora, no anda con yeso, saltando como un guimo con muletas de aquí para allá, no es el canario que se balancea en el columpio dentro de la jaula comiendo los pistachos, se ha ido y se sigue yendo de todas las jaulas como Pedro por su casa y no ha vuelto a mirar hacia atrás. No tiene 10 mandamientos porque no tiene pelos en la lengua, no tiene huevos. No, pero tiene huevos. Yo los he venido poniendo desde toda mi obra, que es una sola, la llamo el manifiesto de los huevos poéticos. Se hace mostrando los huevos, metiendo la pata, piseando aquí y piseando allá. Nace del fuego popular, del pan, de la tierra y de la libertad. Es un perro realengo atravesando un puente entre el norte y el sur, entre el siglo XX y el siglo XXI, entre Segismundo y Hamlet, entre Neruda y Whitman, entre Dickinson y Sor Juana, entre Darío y Stein, entre Sarmiento y Melville, entre los dos yos, en choque está mi yo-yo boing. All right, let me conclude with this poem. I didn't like poetry. Or maybe I should say, I did not find myself tuned to poetry for years. I had read a lot of poetry when I was a young man, and then thought that poetry was just words on the page, didn't say anything, until one student, one student said to me that he wanted me to recite a poem in his wedding, and that he knew exactly what poem he wanted me to recite. So I said, I'm not a good reader of poetry. Please don't embarrass me in public. What poem would you want me to read? And he said, it's called Tu Risa by Pablo Neruda, and he sent it to me. And I read that poem, and I thought, how come I haven't been reading poetry? It's beautiful, it is... so it is a poem about the lover's laughter and what that laughter can do. And if you ask me, it's hard to define that, and you have to be a poet, and you have to be Pablo Neruda to say it exactly this way. Tu risa. Quítame el pan, si quieres, quítame el aire, pero no me quites tu risa. No me quites la rosa, la lanza que desgranas, el agua que de pronto estalla en tu alegría, la repentina ola de plata que te nace. Mi lucha es dura y vuelvo con los ojos cansados, a veces de haber visto la tierra que no cambia. Pero al entrar, tu risa sube al cielo buscándome y abre para mí todas las puertas de la vida. Amor mío, en la hora más oscura, desgrana tu risa, y si de pronto ves que mi sangre mancha las piedras de la calle, ríe, porque tu risa será para mis manos como una espada fresca. Junto al mar en otoño, tu risa debe alzar su cascada de espuma, y en primavera, amor, quiero que tu risa, como la flor que yo esperaba, la flor, la rosa de mi alma sonora, suba. Ríete de la noche, del día, de la luna, ríete de las calles torcidas de la isla, ríete de este torpe muchacho que te quiere, pero cuando yo abro los ojos y los cierro, cuando mis pasos van, cuando vuelven mis pasos, niégame el pan, el aire, la luz, la primavera, pero tu risa nunca, porque me moriría. Your laughter. Deprive me of bread if you want. Deprive me of air, but don't deprive me of your laughter. Don't deprive me of the rose, the stick you thresh the grains with, the water splashing swiftly in your joy, the sudden silver wave born in you. My struggle has been painful. As I return with my eyes sometimes tired from watching the unchanging earth, your laughter enters and rises to heaven in search of me to open all the doors of life. My loved one, in the darkest hour, unsheath your laughter. And if suddenly you see my blood staining the cobblestones, laugh, for your laughter will be for my hands like an unsullied sword. Near the sea in autumn, your laughter must rise in its cascade of foam, and in spring, my love, I want your laughter to be like the flower I anticipated, the blue flower, the rose of my resonant country. Laugh at the night, laugh at the last day, at the moon, laugh at the twisted streets of the island, laugh at this clumsy young man who loves you. Yet when I open my eyes and close them, when my steps go, when my steps return, deny me bread, air, light, spring, but never your laughter, for I would die. Thank you. I don't know if you want to ask anything. I was told that there could be a Q&A. I don't know if there's a microphone. I think poetry speaks for itself, but
Hi. So coming from your background and everything, the poetry that you read, is it all, Spanish to English or Spanish, or do you delve into other things as well?
in my case, I have translated and written in Yiddish and in Hebrew too, and translated from the French. But I am most comfortable doing it in these two languages that are like two homes. For a long time, I thought that the only thing that one could do is translate from one's first language, no, from one's second language, or third, or fourth, to one's first. In other words, that I could translate from English into Spanish, but not from Spanish into English. I apologize if I have done otherwise.
Yeah, I'm a part of a Spanish class that's here, and we're all having a really good time, I'm guessing.
Good, I'm so happy
How
you
you
came.
doing, everybody?
I'm happy that the class came. Thank you. We're all speechless.
Is it Borges who imagined heaven as a kind of library?
Yes. Borges imagined that heaven would be a library. Yes. So we are in heaven.
Where is that actually from? Is it a poem or a kind of a short story?
That is a statement that he gave in one. He includes it in a piece that he wrote for the New Yorker called The Autobiographical Essay,
Oh, okay.
1972 or 73.
Murakami throws that in his novel a few months ago.
Yeah.
It's like, where does that come from?
Yeah, it's Borges.
Go ahead.
I want to ask you, what there is in Mexico that creates a writer like Octavio Paz?
What there is in Mexico?
What is in there that produces that extraordinary human being and such a great writer that is so multifaceted? Can you explain that?
I can't.
I can't either. That's why I'm asking.
Writers, I can't. I mean, Mexico, there are more poets per capita in Chile than in other Latin American countries, which doesn't mean that there are wonderful poets in other parts of Latin America, and proof of it is Octavio Paz. Octavio Paz had an enviable mind, and an astonishing talent to play with words. He was a very broadly read man who was voracious about the Far East, about North American literature, about French, and he put his days and hours to good use by writing all the time. To be a writer is not really to have a profession, is to have a compulsion, to be a scribe of a higher spirit that dictates through you or with whom you are in constant touch. So when somebody asks a writer if he or she is going to work, I'm working from 9 to 5 in my writing. To me, the word work seems anachronistic. It seems that literature, when it flows, and it not always flows meaning like a river, an unimpeded river, nobody should stop it. We should simply stay still and listen to it. Like Borges, like Octavio Paz, I believe that our duty as writers is to be good readers. There is nothing that you can do better than admire other writers who have already done what they were here to do, and envy them. I think envy is an essential part creativity. And it is an engine for us to be able to go out. And Octavio Paz had that. He was a man, he was a big man. He was big in physically, but also in his personality. And his work is like a universe, a galaxy with planets that have their own life, that rotate around the center, and yet you have, in order to understand fully what he is about, you need to explore the different parts of the galaxy, of that galaxy. Let me conclude with I have been working on Neruda's Odes. That is my latest project. Neruda fell in love with the ode early on in his life and spent his entire life paying tribute to the ode. He wrote more than 200, and unlike other poets who wrote odes to politicians and to big historic moments, Neruda wrote odes to the most mundane of artifacts, shoelaces, a pencil, an onion, sadness. And if we read the 200 plus odes by Neruda, we have a record of a poet in an intimate, even erotic relationship with the world, with the most insignificant objects that surround us all the time, and without which we would not be anything. So this is one of the odes, and in it he celebrates watermelon. First in Spanish. Oda a la sandía. El árbol del verano intenso, invulnerable, es todo cielo azul, sol amarillo, cansancio a gorgotones, es una espada sobre los caminos, un zapato quemado en las ciudades. La caridad, el mundo nos agobian, nos pegan los ojos con polvoreada, con súbitos golpes de oro, nos acosan los pies con espinitas, con piedras calurosas, y la boca sufre más que todos los dedos. Tiene sed, la garganta, la dentadura, los labios, la lengua. Queremos beber a cataratas la noche azul, el polo, y entonces cruza por el cielo el más fresco de todos los planetas, la redonda, suprema y celestial sandía. Es la fruta del árbol de la sed. Es la ballena verde del verano. El universo seco, de pronto tachoneado por este firmamento de frescura, deja caer la fruta rebosante. Se abren sus hemisferios mostrando una bandera verde, blanca y escarlata que se disuelve en cascada, en azúcar, en delicia. Cofre del agua, plácida reina de la frutería, bodega de profundidad, luna terrestre. Oh, pura, en tu abundancia se deshacen rubíes y uno quisiera morderte hundiendo en ti la cara, el pelo, el alma. Te divisamos en la sed como mina o montaña de espléndido alimento, pero te conviertes entre la dentadura y el deseo en solo fresca luz que se deslíe, en manantial que nos tocó cantando. Y así no pasas en la siesta abrasadora, no pasas, solo pesas, y tu gran corazón de brasa fría se convirtió en el agua de una gota. Ode to the watermelon. The tree of summer, intense, invulnerable, is all blue sky, yellow sun, exhaustion dripping. It's a sword above the roads, a burned shoe in the cities. Clarity and the world overwhelm us, hit us in the eye with dust, with sudden blows of gold. They harass our feet with thorns, with heated stones, and the mouth suffers more than all the toes. The throat is thirsty. The teeth, the lips, tongue. We want to drink waterfalls, the blue night, the pole. Just then, the coolest of all planets crosses the sky. The rounded, supreme, and celestial watermelon. It's the fruit from the tree of thirst. It's the green whale of summer. The dry universe, suddenly marked by this firmament of coolness, allows the fruit to drop. Its hemispheres open, showing a flag, green, white, scarlet, dissolving itself in cascades. Sugar, delight. Water coffer, placid fruit queen. Warehouse of depth, earthly moon. O purity incarnate, rubies fall apart in your abundance. We would like to bite you, sinking the face, the hair, the soul into you. Thirsty, we see you like a mine or mountain of splendid food, but you transform between our teeth and desire only into fresh light that unleashes us, becoming fresh light that touches us, as spring, singing. And then you are weightless in the all-encompassing siesta. You are weightless, only passing, and your great heart of cold embers is transformed into water contained in a single drop. Have a good evening.